Welcome to EconRoots, your podcast on the roots of economic thought. I'm Stefan.
And I'm Otto.
Let's get on with today's conversation.
It's been my privilege to write a column every year when the prize is awarded on trying to explain what is the significance of this year's prize. And I've been doing that for since, I think it's 15 years or something like that. So it's quite a handful of prizes.
Impressive, because as we'll probably find out in the theory, some of the awardees are very easy to explain for a general audience, but some of them is probably quite hard, right? Do you remember any that was harder than others?
The technical, rather technical work, for instance, prizes in econometrics, they are obviously more difficult to understand to listeners or audience which is who are not economists, because they are awarded for sort of called tools of the trade, and of course these tools are important and familiar to us economists. But if you are not an economist, you probably won't know much about them. So that they differ quite a lot.
Exactly. So what we see going on is the old Adam Smith saying with division of labor and specialization, right? I mean, obviously, as the field get more advanced, the layman is harder and harder to grasp the tool of the trade, yes. Right? So, cool. A couple more points about housekeeping before we get into the topic of today, which is the significance of the prize and what the prize is that another reason why we switched to English is because we wanted to start doing interviews. And actually, we have the first interview coming up, which is going to be Deidre McCloskey. And I was very excited to do that because Deidre actually started, she did her graduate studies at Harvard, which is a freshwater school. And she did her first postgraduate work at Chicago, which is the premium saltwater school. And I thought it was very interesting to hear her reflection on that period in the history of economic thought, which is around the same time as the advent of macro, which is one of the main themes in season 2 here. So be excited for that. Another thing before we get into the prize is that how are we actually going to do this? So in my never-ending naivety and in my never-ending naivety, I thought it would make sense to do this chronologically, and that would have taken a long time and probably been fairly boring and sounded a lot like a lexicon work or something like that. So we had some talk about how to do it. We also asked the market. The market gave very confusing results. Some of them wanted chronologically, and other wanted it thematically, and so on. So can you explain a little bit about how we decided to do it?
Yes, we tried to, instead of going chronologically about our business, we're trying to organize it in themes. So we're taking some general themes. The problem is, of course, that some themes are overlapping, and some of our laureates have done work in different areas. So some of them we're going to revisit a number of times, and some will be more related to a single theme. And it also means that we are going to talk. Some themes are more important than others, so we're going to talk more about some laureates than others. There's no way to avoid that.
Exactly, and what I think we should, what we have decided to do is to make a promise to dear listeners that we will cover every single awardee. Everybody will be covered, and everybody will also be covered with a bio. So there's going to be a background on everyone's lives and these kind of things. But what we'll do is that we'll have no more than 3 bios per episode, because we don't think you can stand to listen to more. And we call those bio breaks. And don't worry, we're not native English speakers, as you probably already guessed, but we do realize that there's a bit of a pun there, right? But we call them bio breaks. So there's a bio break for when we talk about their lives and background and so on. And then what we'll do is once we cover somebody, and then when we, if that person's work is relevant for a later episode, we'll just make sure to refer in the show notes or sometimes during the episode to the episode where you can hear that person's bio and a little bit more detail about that person's body of work. So I think that's everything. I think we should jump into today's topic. I think that was all the housekeeping. So we'll start with the history of the prize, and then we'll get into discussing the significance of the prize. And I'll just get some facts, and Otto, you can comment as needed, and then we'll get into discussing it. So the first Nobel Prizes were awarded from 1901, but the award in economics actually was not awarded until 1969. And some people claim it's not an official award because it was not in the original will of Alfred Nobel, who initiated the first prizes. Whether that's a fair point of criticism, we'll discuss in a little while, but it is a fair point to mention. So as of 2020, the award has been given 52 times to 86 recipients. And why is there there's a difference between these numbers? Is because that sometimes more people than one get it, basically. Either because they work together or because they deliberately have not worked together, but it represents different strain of thoughts.
I think a maximum of 3 people have received it at one time.
True. Yes. Good point. So the prize was installed by the Swedish bank, Swedish Federal Bank, or National Bank, when they turned 300 years. So that was the 300-year anniversary. They installed this prize. It is awarded in the same way as the other prizes. And the history of the other prizes are different because, as I said, they originated from Alfred Nobel, who was a famous producer of dynamite, who died childless and who was a pessimist in personal affairs, but an optimist for humanity, a very interesting person. So he had a lot of correspondence going on with researchers and scientists and so on. And he generally believed that technology could improve the world if we wanted to. But economics at that point was not really an established field of its own. It was still very much mired in philosophy and these things. So he didn't make the prize for that. So that came later with the bank. And the procedure is that all of the prizes are run by the Swedish Academy of Science. A person must be nominated by other people, so you cannot nominate yourself. Some people have nominating privileges. I don't think Otto has either, but
no. But if you are working as a university professor, which I'm not, I'm working in a private institution. But if you're working at a university in the Nordic countries, you are actually able to put forward a candidate.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. Okay, so. Besides that, they can also request nominations, right? So they can go to specific scientific sub-communities of the economic field or the chemistry field or whatever prize they're dealing with and ask for nominations as well. All nominations must come with a reason why they're nominated. It's not enough to just give a name. You have to put some work in. That has changed a lot over the years, though, right?
Yes. In the beginning, they would give a brief statement of why they nominated somebody for the prize. Now they are doing that still, but then they are also putting forward a large paper which summarizes their contribution to economics. So that would be 20, 30 pages, something like that, explaining in scientific terms why the prize is awarded.
Cool.
And actually, usually those papers are quite good. So if you're interested in a topic, they are interesting to read.
Yeah. Good review papers. And so then the committee goes through their work and they sort out and shortlist candidates, and they either themselves check these papers or write additional papers. Sometimes they get external consultants to help them as well. And then they come to a decision. And relatively recently, the archives was opened up 50 years back. So we don't have a lot of gossips on the economic one yet, but for some of the other prizes, there's some gossip as to who get it and why and the discussions and so on. So that's quite an interesting field of its own there. But other than that, they announced the winner in October. It is possible to skip a prize, but that has never been done in economics as far as I remember. No, exactly. And then you're invited to an award ceremony, which is this top-class affair with royalty and everything, and lots and pomp and wicker and all that stuff. And therefore, it's also a very prestigious prize. It's also a fairly high monetary value. But of course, as economists would know, with rational expectations, if we take the chances of winning a Nobel Prize, the actual utility is fairly low. But I guess once you actually get the check in your hand, you don't think so much about that. It was originally intended to be awarded to discoveries in the past years that have improved mankind. But now I think we should call it more like a lifetime achievement award or something like that. What do you think, Otto?
Yes, the original Nobel Prizes were, as you mentioned, in the will of Alfred Nobel. I think he had in mind something like his own invention of dynamite, something that in the preceding year or the year before that was a significant discovery, could be rewarded to have an incentive to make progresses like that. I think that was in his mind. He was also very keen on disarmament. So the Peace Prize was very much linked to work for disarmament. And of course, what we have seen is that prizes are not rewarded like that. The Peace Prize is much broader than the disarmament, and the scientific prizes are given for great discoveries, for lifetime work. But the discoveries which have been very well established in science, usually for many years before you are awarded a Nobel Prize.
Which also makes sense. I mean, I guess in Alfred Nobel's view, he focused more on what we would call inventions than innovations, right? So the idea of coming up in an invention, and now you combine these two things and this works. But science today is a long process of debate and rooting out ideas and meta-analysis and all these kind of things. So especially in medicine, for instance, I mean, it's not just a matter of coming up with a pill and then that works, like you have to go through all these studies and clinical trials and stuff. It simply cannot be done in a year, right? So
no, that has changed.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about the significance of the prize. And I stumbled about on this source that we linked to in the show notes by Lindbeck. And he says that if we are to talk about the Nobel Prize, we should talk about whether it's awarded on originality, impact, and importance. So if we take his framework here, originality, impact, and importance, so how well do you think the prize live up to those, and the prize in economics specifically? Because that's what we know anything about. None of us are physicists or any chemists or anything like that. Yeah,
I think it does live up to a very high degree in economics. I think what you have to understand about the Nobel Prize is that it's not great because it was in the will of Alfred Nobel. It's great because of the way it has been administered. So, because at least for a number of the prizes, the prize committee has been able to pick the foremost and best scientists, that has made the prize great. And I think that if you look at the prize in economics, that is especially true. That is especially true. I think it's very difficult to find prizes that are not very has a very good reason for it. So I think it's because the Academy of Science has done such a good job that it is a great prize. It's not because it was in the will of Alfred Nobel, and as you said, the prize of economics wasn't in his will. It was established by the Central Bank of Sweden in honor of the memory of Alfred Nobel. I think it has worked very well. But thanks to the Academy of Science in Sweden, which has done a great job of finding the best and most original contributors to economic science.
I think that's some really interesting points here, because that is actually what science is, right? Science is doing the methodological right work. It's also asking interesting questions in these things, but it's definitely that. It's not, you're not scientific just because you have a PhD degree, right? You're scientific in how you actually work, right? So, I think I agree with you that I think the prize in economics have proven to be a scientific prize more than anything else. But I also agree with the last thing you say, that the originality is very good, because in the first part of the prize, like until Hayek got it, it was all awarded basically to Keynesians, which were the mainstream at that point, right? But then they started giving it to other people, and I think one of the big powers of the prize is that it has been given to people who might not necessarily be known to most mainstream economics when they got awarded the prize, but still had solid economic credentials and relevance for the field, and thereby help inspiring. Werner Smith with experimental economics, for instance, right? Douglas North with institutions, and there are several examples which I think is very interesting, and therefore, so it's not just a lifetime achievement award in whatever happens to be fashionable, but it's actually also something that can inspire the field. I think that's the originality part is really interesting.
I think that's true.
So, and I think we can also see that there's actually a very wide set of awardees. Like, it's not just one school thought, it's not just one method. There's actually many different people who got it, which I think is interesting. Few women, though.
That's true. I think only 2 women so far have, among the 86 people have been women. I think it does reflect the unfortunate fact that economics has been a field with few women in it. So it's not because the committee has been unwilling to award women. It's because there has been too few in the past. It's changing now, and of course, as we're going to discuss this a little bit too, but some of the most of the laureates receive it quite late in their life. So that means that the prizes still reflect the way the economic science was some years ago rather than present. So I think that has been actually it's a hallmark of the commitment to giving it to the best contributions, regardless of sex, regardless of other circumstances. And then, because you're choosing from a very small sample, you see only 2 women getting it. You could have, of course, there are other women who could have been candidates and would have been reasonable to award it to, but I think it's basically it shows the commitment of the academy to science rather than circumstance that we have this very biased sample.
Very biased sample, as we say in economics.
In terms of sex.
Yeah. So still the result of self-selection, one might say, to get to. Yeah, I think you're right. Also, unless you actually go to conferences and meet people, it's very hard to necessarily know what gender they have when you read references, right? You have your surname, and that would be it, and then an initial in the front. And for instance, I can say for myself, in all honesty, that within management science, for instance, it took me many years before I realized that Edith Penrose was actually Edith Penrose, a woman who's one of the founders of the resource-based view of management, and which I'm a big fan of and used a lot in my work. But I actually never really connected the dots, right? That because you just read her work, but it was just Penrose, and you would cite it, and that would be it. Yeah.
And if you submit a paper for the journal article, it is anonymous, so they won't know your sex either.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Although some are actually starting to ask now when you submit, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Wonder what they're using that for. But that's another topic that we shouldn't get into now.
You are listening to EconRoots, your podcast on the history of economic thought, with your hosts Otto Brøns-Petersen and Stefan Kierkegaard Sløk-Madsen. Thank you for joining the conversation.
So another thing we can notice is that it's been given to many Americans, though, right? And there might be a couple of reasons for that. In the last season of EconRoots, I talked about how the epicenter of economic thought moved from Europe to the US during particularly the second half of the 20th century. And that might seem to be what we see going on here, that the US is where it's at now, right? Yes. Yeah. So if we look at the significance of the price, Otto, do you think it serves as an incentive?
Well, I think it is prestigious to win the Nobel Prize. So it works as an incentive, and I think it is an incentive in the way it works, in the way that it makes economics more interesting to students. Mm-hmm. So I don't think anybody goes quite probably somebody, but not many picks the field of economics because they expect to win a Nobel Prize. You have to.
They'll get disappointed pretty fast.
Yes, I think so. But it makes it gives significance to the discipline, and that of course attracts attention. So I think making more people aware of what economics is is serving as an incentive, but not in the way that probably that people enter economics in order to win a Nobel Prize.
So what you're saying is that maybe the incentive is more on the recipients, not on the recipient of the award side, but the recipient of the science side, right? Like I might be interested in reading about the work from somebody who got the award because they got the award, yes, which I would normally skip. Where I think that's true. I think that is true. And you can also take it further, that argument. I've been teaching a course where we had a lot of the classics and modern classics, and it was also a sales point to students, saying, like, for instance, Werner Smith, which we mentioned earlier, his idea about ecological rules and constructed rules, and which can be sort of complex for some students, and they might not see the relevance and so on. But because he got a Nobel Prize, you can say, like, this guy got a Nobel Prize, so maybe you should read his stuff, right? Yeah. So I think that's true. So then one of the theses around the Nobel Prize comes from Professor Böttke at George Mason University, and he has this idea about mainstream economics being whatever economists happens to think is interesting at the time, the fashion of the field, and then mainline economics. And he's been very direct on this, saying that there are certain ones who fall within the mainline and certain within the mainstream. To what degree do you think that's a valid way of looking at the prize?
Well, I'm not sure I completely agree with Pete Böttke. I think it's they actually do pick work which is significant, even if it's outside the mainstream or mainline, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's one of the reason why it has been so successful is that the Academy has been able to pick rather broadly.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I love Pete's work, by the way, or Professor Bødker. I personally gotten a lot out of reading his work, but I think it's sort of a very harsh way of looking at the prize, because there will be some you leave out and some you leave in. And do you then only look at the specific work they got the Nobel Prize for when trying to leave them in or leave them out, or are you looking at a more broader field? And as far as I remember, he doesn't consider, for instance, Friedman to be mainline economics, right? And I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think he's pretty mainline. And obviously, there's some stuff, if you're more Austrian, you might not agree with what he's saying, right? Or more Keynesian or whatever. Professor Bødker would definitely be on the more Austrian side there. But I see what he's doing. I like the idea of saying there's certain, at least, fundamental truth in economics that might be more clear in the body of work among some of them than among others. So I see that point, but I think it's hard to divide it like that. I actually think most of the prizes, not all of them, most of them are both mainline and mainstream.
Yes,
I would say, but. And there's also why I don't see a lot of randomness either in the awards. I think, as we talked about, it's a very thorough work while they're giving it. But one thing that's come up in the debate around the prize is the potential for awarding errors, right? And what that does. So the two errors people talk about is that you could commit an error where you give it to somebody unworthy, or you could commit an error where you are overlooking somebody who turns out later to be extremely important, right? You know, the classic argument from arts that the painter is not appreciated in his own time, or the artist is not appreciated in his own time. And if that is true, then that would lead, rationally speaking, and we are economists, to become more risk adverse or conservative in your awarding. What about this criticism of the prize or this theory? Do you think there's something there, or is this more likely to be true?
I think it's very difficult to find examples of people who were awarded the prize who were not worthy of it.
Yeah,
maybe in the beginning there was a tendency to give it to people from the Nordic countries rather than the rest of the world, which was, I think, much more common for the Nobel Prizes in the beginning. You might have a tendency for the Nobel Prize in economics for that. Some people might not have gotten it if they hadn't been from the Nordic countries, but it's not a very strong tendency. And for instance, there has never been a Dane who has been awarded the Nobel Prize. Actually, it's the only Nobel Prize which has never been awarded to a Dane, is the Nobel Prize in economics. And so I think that's a tribute to the fact, not that they have left out Danes, but the fact that even if there is a slight, or has been a slight tendency to pick people from the Nordic countries in the Nobel Prizes, that doesn't exist anymore. So I think that I don't think that that's a problem at all. Are there people who should have gotten the Nobel Prize but who didn't get it? Surely.
Yeah, surely. Definitely.
And you have to realize that this is a prize which you award once a year. You give it to up to 3 persons. And of course, it's going to be a sample of the best work in science, but it's not. It doesn't work the way that if you make a contribution to a significant contribution to economic science that could be awarded the Nobel Prize, it will be awarded the Nobel Prize. That's not the way it's going to work. And especially because the Nobel Prizes we talked about has been awarded to people who are not that young, but they are late in their career. It is, of course, unfortunately, some of the obvious candidates who should have gotten it, but who died before that time, they didn't get it. Yeah. I think it was For instance, when it was awarded to the French economist Jean Tirole a few years ago, it was quite obvious that if his collaborator Jean-Jacques Lafont had been alive still, he died unfortunately rather young, but if he had been alive, he would have been awarded the prize along with Tirole as well. I think you could even read it between the lines in the scientific background paper. So that's one example. But it doesn't. If you don't get the Nobel Prize, it doesn't mean that you're not qualified to get it. But it's not everybody who is qualified who is going to get it.
I think that's a good point. Also, when you read the banquet speeches, which we're doing when we're prepping for these episodes, some people are also humbled by that fact when they get the prize, and they spend a lot of time both in their acceptance speeches, but also in their award lectures to make reference and be grateful for specific people who went before them, who they might even at least think is as deserving or more deserving than themselves, right? Kahneman's longtime collaborator Tversky is an example of this. So I think that's true, and there's definitely people who deserved it, who didn't get it, and you have to survive for a certain amount of years, quite frankly, to get it. I mean, this is not to laugh at that horrible fact, but that's just a human condition. And we also have to stress that now in this series, we are focusing on the Nobel Prize because we think it's deserved it. It's a great prize, but there's lots of other great economists out there who didn't get it and who might never get it, whose work is extremely important and very much worthy of interest. And that's for future seasons. We're going to spend the next probably many seasons doing this work to get through all of them. So it's not the only pillar of importance here. So one last thing I'd like to talk about before we end today's episode is a critique that was actually raised by one of the awardees himself, which was Hayek. When Hayek got it, he actually advised against having a Nobel Prize in economics. Do you remember his criticism, Otto?
Yes, I do. I think he was worried that it would give too much authority to economists, and that people would listen too much to economists, in the sense that not that economics that Hayek didn't regard economics as important or important for policy, but that there would be a tendency to confuse more personal political views with the scientific contribution.
Yeah.
So, of course, if you look at somebody like Paul Krugman, who is a very polemic writer, taking part in the political debate,
and very partisan, right? Directly partisan, right?
Yes, and that's his style, and some like it, some don't. He got a Nobel Prize, but I really don't think that and he got it for work in economic geography, which was very very fine work. So it was completely a perfectly good award he got for his work, but he didn't get it for his polemicisms or things like that. And maybe he speaks with a little bit more authority because he got a Nobel Prize, but I really don't think so. In the end, people can differentiate between what is politics and what is economic science, and he didn't get it for not liking the Republicans.
Yes, I hope so. True. I mean, it's obviously true that if you can put Nobel laureate next to your name, you do speak with more authority, and there is an authority bias, obviously, right? We know that. That's. But I think you're true. I think Hayek's criticism is interesting because he's basically touching on the human element in all of us, right? Saying this might be too much to handle, right? So that's one part of it, saying, like, would I start to take myself too seriously if I get this prize, and then not be humble enough about the stuff I do not know anything about, which was part of his research regime, the pretense of knowledge and all that stuff. We'll talk about that when we get to him. But I also think there is an interesting scientific point saying that is economics a science about everything, or is economics, especially nowadays, subdivided into specific fields about specific things, right? That might share some common principles of rationality and these things, but are still, actually, if you, for instance, is a maritime economist, you know a lot about ships and ports and these kind of things, right? But you do not necessarily know a lot about expensive financial policies or something like that, right? So yeah. So I think it's an interesting criticism. It's worth to notice and
I think you can also discuss how much can science advance human society, and I think one of the reasons why Hayek was uncomfortable was that there has been a tendency to believe that if only science get advanced enough, then everything can be planned. So that's the way society should work. In the end, when we get enough science, we can plan everything, and we can do without all these spontaneous, error-prone individual acts. And I think that was Hayek didn't believe that. Actually, there was a discussion between Milton Friedman and Desmond Tutu, two laureates. Milton Friedman, an economic laureate, Desmond Tutu, and a laureate he got the Peace Prize. And they had a discussion, how much have science bettered our condition, and has it worsened the human condition? And actually, even if he was always an optimist, and he himself made a great contribution to science, Milton Friedman argued against the view that the science had bettered the human condition as much as Desmond Tutu, who was much more optimistic. So there is, of course, this tension, but I think it's confusing two different questions. Science is not appropriate for running a centrally planned economy, but science is important. For instance, the reason why we know that a centrally planned economy is a great challenge is because of a lot of economic science. So it rather depends on what do you use science for, rather than science in itself. But you're right, there was this skepticism. Then there's of course the economic price has been criticized for not being real science. That real science is hard science. You have to work with atoms or stars or something like that in order to be a real scientist. I think this is also a misunderstanding. Of course, economic science is different from the hard sciences in the sense that our subject matter is different. We are dealing basically with individual choice, whereas the hard sciences deal more with matter. But that has to do with differences in the objects that we are studying. It doesn't mean that we can't that we can't have a procedure calling it scientific, which applies to economics as well as the hard sciences.
I agree with those points, and without going too further down that road, because that's a big topic, that is often something maybe that a lot of laypersons has got a lot of trouble with. I mean, they assume science has to do with white coats and labs and mixing compounds together, exactly. Or as you're saying, stars and charts and stuff like that. But I mean, I think it was Mary Reese of New York University, I think he was the one who once wrote that science is more about the questions you ask than the answers you find oftentimes. And And lots of STEM science is also very speculative. They have to, because you can't do an experiment on a black hole, right? I mean, you have to speculate and all these kind of things, right? And just like lots of economics can be experimental, right? I mean, it's and I think it's about the process. And this is also why I think Hayek's critique is interesting, because if we look at the classical hierarchy of scientific evidence, right, or again, science is not necessarily about proving something. It's more about, building evidence for that is something is more likely to be true than something else. I mean, right above and the lowest step is like personal experience, right, in the hierarchy of evidence, and then like right above that is expert committees. But there's a far jump before you get higher up, right? And obviously, if a lot of experts go around thinking they're smart because they were told they were smart, that is a potential issue, right? And if everybody confirms to you that you are smart because you got this prize, you might not necessarily have the humbleness needed to actually keep doing science in the right way with systematic literature reviews and hypothesis tests and whatever else we have in our toolbox. So I think it's an interesting critique, and I think it's something we can have in the back of our mind as we go through the laureates. But I think we should end today's episode, unless you have something Nope, you're good. Perfect. So just to wrap it up, thank you so much for joining us on this long journey. It will be a long journey, right? But we think it's an important prize, and we're very excited to do this show. I have personally wanted to do something like this for many years. We do like, this will be a labor of love. We like the prize, as I think you found here. We try to be fair and brought some criticism, but we like the prize. We think it's a solid work. It's a good brand. It's an interesting thing. We have this prize once a year that also is surprising to us sometimes who gets it, right? Well, it's always surprising who gets it, but sometimes, okay. So I should mention that here. I, for one, has wondered for a long time why Kirshner or somebody else in the entrepreneurship field has not gotten it, because that has been a big trend in the last 25 years in the econ community. But, who knows? Maybe, right? And also remember, there's many important economists who have not gotten the prize, whose work is also relevant and interesting. But for the next couple of seasons of EconRoots, we'll be focusing on who got the prize. So I hope you'll join us. And until next time, my name's Stefan, and this has been
Otto.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us exploring the history of economic thought. You're very welcome to email comments and suggestions to stefan@cpas.dk. Please like and share and recommend this podcast anywhere you can and think it's relevant. Until next time, stay rational.